Welcome to the dfree in the Black podcast. My name is DeForest Soares Jr., but my friends call me Buster, and my enemies do too. My co-host is Tamika Stembridge, brilliant attorney and all things genius. There is no greater cause than the cause that invites Black people to financial freedom. We want our people to be in the Black. All right, Happy New Year, Tamika. Welcome back to the In the Black podcast, the dfree podcast. This is our fourth year. Can you imagine?
Our fourth season.
Just of the podcast itself. This is like our 300th year of work. And I'm looking forward to this. During the holidays and especially during COVID, I've learned a lot about people's listening habits by podcasts. And who would ever imagine that many podcasts have become more popular than radio?
Yeah, definitely. They're easy to produce. They're, topical. They're timely. There's not a whole lot of production involved with it. And the good ones have really, really good content to share. And so I'm excited that it's our fourth season. People still continue to listen. And it's one of our bigger avenues outside of like your radio show that's consistently providing content to people. So I'm looking forward to season 4.
Well, the major difference between our podcast and my radio show is that people have to be a subscriber to satellite radio to hear my radio show, whereas the podcast is free.
Yeah.
And that's great. One of the things I love about our podcast is that we started long before COVID with a kind of underlying theme of this is possible. The kind of people that we interviewed, the kind of subjects that we had, encourage people to believe that despite systemic racism, despite sexism, despite the divide in the political world, there's still opportunities to do well and to do better. And that's what I'm looking forward to this year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you've done some good expanding. I know we'll talk about it later in the show, but I'm always looking forward to the guests that we bring on and even the personalities that we've been able to launch from the podcast. So many people that I know actually got their start on our podcast, which is funny. I had no idea that, we were doing some of the first interviews with some people that are in the industry and across industries. And so I'm looking forward to our expansion this year. And I won't spill the beans, but I know people see it in the little logo. But dfree is going bigger this year. So I'm excited for you to make that announcement.
So I'm glad you said that because we had such outstanding guests on our podcast over the last 3 years that we've invited some of them to join us and have their own podcast, but to have it on the dfree platform. And the dfree podcast network is starting really with people who were guests of ours, but who had so much to say, we couldn't fit it into one show. And so we said, why don't you have your own show and let us promote you, not just one time for 20 minutes, but all the time, all year long.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm excited. Congratulations. I wish there was like confetti on the screen to show it, but I'm excited. And our first, this first season 4 episode is really all about highlighting our new podcast hosts, highlighting the network and making sure that people know that beyond our core dfree message, we're continuing to expand and provide additional voices and resources for people to meet their financial freedom goals. So this is good.
Good. So I think Dr. Nicole is someone who was on our podcast. She's a certified financial planner. She's someone who comes alongside of us and helps us when people reach out and need financial advice. They're trying to create a financial plan. They're looking at their financial future. We have called upon Dr. Nicole, who has been a great dfree partner. And so let's talk to Dr. Nicole about her podcast. Dr. Nicole.
Thank you, Dr. Soares, just for even allowing me to come on. Happy New Year's. Thank you to you and Tamika. I'm so excited to be here with you and joining you in this new endeavor for the dfree Podcast Network. It is my privilege to be here today.
Well, Dr. Nicole, you're one of the few Black women in the country who is a certified financial planner. Now, remind us again. I know you talked about it before, but remind us again as we introduce your new podcast on the dfree Podcast Network. What is a certified financial planner, better known as a CFP?
Yes. So I have been a CFP for the last 20 years in the securities industry for the last 30 and counting, Dr. Soaries. And what comprehensive financial planners do is they take a holistic approach to help and assist individuals with planning for their financial futures, not only to establish, but we look at certain areas that include debt, estate planning, retirement planning, life insurance, ensuring that that is provided for, and overall investing, so that a individual is not just looking at one particular area of their lives, but they're doing planning for the totality, even in estate planning and making sure that you're leaving a legacy to loved ones and setting families up. So I love that level of work, and it's an honor to have been doing it for 20 plus years and being really one that is an elitist in that area. I'm also excited that there are more people that are going into comprehensive financial planning.
Well, I thank God for you because, as you know, I've written books about money. I talk about money. I preach about money. And often when people have a chance to ask me questions, they ask me very specific questions. They'll say, I've got $5,000. How should I invest it? Or they'll say, should I get term life insurance or whole life insurance? And I have to remind them quickly, I am not a CFP. I'm not even a C. The only thing I'm certified to do is to preach. So I always want our people to really talk with someone who has your expertise and your qualifications. The key word is holistic, because without looking at one's total financial situation, it's impossible to make intelligent financial decisions. And that's what you do. So Dr. Nicole, tell us about your podcast, though. What are you going to be doing in this Dr. Nicole podcast?
So it's called Financial Solutions with Dr. Nicole, and it's going to be somewhat prescriptive, as you identified. Oftentimes when you go to a doctor, in order for the doctor to appropriately assess where it is that you need to go from a physical perspective, you must tell them everything that's going on with your body. I think it's the same thing for comprehensive financial planning. If you have a desire to go somewhere financially, then you need someone that knows everything that's going on in your financial history. And so what Financial Solutions with Dr. Nicole is going to be is for people, everyday people, to come and say, this is what it is that I'm doing. This is where I'm standing. This is what I have. What can you do? And my goal is, through a conversation, to be able to write that initial prescription for an individual that gets them on their way to great financial planning, healing, and wholeness. And I think it should be exciting, because one of the things that I bring to the table, in addition to just looking strategically at the comprehensive planning, is to ensure that whatever goals and dreams that an individual has, it's incorporated into your financial future. So if money were not an issue, what would you be doing with your life? And how can we accommodate that desire as well? So Financial Solutions is going to be very exciting for people, especially in this new year.
Well, that's big. When you talked about the doctor, you made me think about a sermon I preached some time ago. And I talked about the fact that if you go to the doctor for your knee or for your arm, whatever you go to the doctor for, the first thing the doctor does is pull out his or her stethoscope and listen to you breathe. and so in our financial journey, I think an analogy is that before you panic, before you make quick decisions, before you invest money into any kind of resource, I want you to breathe. I want you to inhale and exhale. And I liken sitting down with someone like yourself as a part of my breathing, because it gives me a chance to really inhale, exhale, look at my whole picture before jumping into a decision. Well, listen, I appreciate the Financial Solutions with Dr. Nicole. Of course, by us doing our podcast on the same platform, you'll find that there are people who might come to hear one of the stories that we tell on the In the Black podcast, and they'll end up coming over to the Financial Solutions podcast. And then someone may be listening to Dr. Nicole offer financial solutions, and they might be intrigued by the notion that there's something called Bible economics. And so I'm proud to have along with us on our team on this podcast platform in this dfree podcast movement, one of Wall Street's greatest, one of the few Black executives who has done the kind of successful ventures that he has done on Wall Street, who rose above what would be considered not only a glass ceiling, but a steel ceiling, and paved his way into a level of achievement that I think is both admirable and inspiring. So you'll be proud to know that alongside of you is Obi McKenzie, who will be talking about Bible economics. So let's see how Obi describes his podcast.
Yeah, my podcast is called Bible Economics. I have things I wish I had known. I've spent over 50 years of my life in the financial services industry in a number of different positions with major money center organizations to include investment banks, commercial banks, assistant treasurer of the New York Times newspaper. Let's say I've had a long walk from Harvard Business School with a concentration in finance in 1972. I have been walking through the financial services industry and have been privileged to see a lot of things along the way from my very humble beginnings back in McKenzie, Tennessee. Well, at McKenzie, Tennessee, McKenzie is my name, but we didn't own anything. They owned us. So, but I have been blessed to see a lot of things. They let this rabbit in the briar patch, and I've learned a lot of things that I feel responsible to share with my people and anyone that has ears to hear. I think it is a calling that God has on my life to share what I've learned about what I distinctly believe are two economies at work. One, man's economy, which appears to be rooted in getting more, and then God's economy, which is countercultural to man's economy, which is rooted in giving more. I believe that one works and the other one does not, and I think that Bible economics espouses the 2,300 scriptures in the Bible that are about money. There are about 2,300 about money, far less about faith, and far less about love. I believe that God knew that the biggest competition for our soul selves would be the love of money versus the love of God. And Bible economics takes those scriptures that are about money to introduce the listener to a different way of thinking about the money, the shekels, the greenbacks, which is something we spend a lot of time thinking about each and every day. So it's a completely different perspective around money. Uh, Bible teaches, "Be ye not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by a renewing of your mind." And so I discuss principles that are a little different than what I learned back at Harvard Business School and what I learned in 50 years on Wall Street. Well, it's by the time I was spending the 50 years on Wall Street, I was also had my head stuck in my Bible, and and so I began to not just believe my Bible in my head, but in my heart. And so Bible economics is about heartfelt exposition around those principles in the Bible that are about God's money.
Obi, I have to tell you, one, I admire your journey so much. I mean, you name drop institutions and accomplishments as if they were just, things that everyday people get to do. And I don't ever want to underestimate all of what you've achieved. But I also would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge where you are today. You are retired, I believe, from BlackRock. You look really comfortable and cozy, and you're in the sunshine. And I think it's important for your listeners to kind of understand that full spectrum journey. So that's one of the things I'm looking forward to hearing from you about your experience and what you've experienced going through your career in finance, and also the faith walk around finance. Who's your ideal listener for this podcast?
Well, I said anyone that has ears to hear, and I truly mean that. And these are ears of the heart, not ears on the head.
Yeah.
So that's it. This runs the gamut for age groups. One of the subtitles for my book is "Things That I Wish I Had Known," and I do indeed wish I had known some of these things much earlier in my life. You know, I have been blessed with 77 years of life, and as recent as November 7. So I'm experiencing my 777. It
Wow.
won't happen again. So I'm a triple threat right now,
I
right?
love it. I love it. And we're excited to be in 777 with you on the D-Free Podcast Network. It truly is an honor to partner with you. You all, if you missed Obi's initial episodes, I think you've been on a few times with us. Please go back and listen, but get ready for more Bible economics with Obi McKenzie. Thank you so much for joining the D-Free Podcast Network, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Absolutely.
All right, folks. One of the most exciting, well, two of the most exciting realities about where we're going this year is this. Number one, we are working on building out really a stable of talent, a whole platform of information driven by personalities. I'm even more excited about the fact that one of the key podcasts is going to be created and moderated and owned by my youngest son, Martin Sories. Martin, thank you for your passion. Tell us about your podcast and why it should be so important to everybody.
So the podcast is called Financing Your Athletic Dreams. And what it does is help people get a sense of what it means to invest into a young athlete who's coming up. My background is in basketball, as you know, and you spent plenty of money investing into camps and teams and all kinds of things that helped give my brother and me experiences over the years in the basketball space. So I have a lot of experience in playing. I've been training for about 5 or 6 years now, doing personal skills training. I do media work in basketball. So I've been exposed to almost every level of what it means to develop a basketball career in different capacities. So the podcast is going to be meant to offering information about what that would look like, what especially now and today, because you have so many different fields and options between a personal trainer, AAU, everything is an investment, even more so now today. And there's a lot more information and access today than there even was when I was coming up. So the podcast is meant to kind of highlight that kind of information and people who are also in it, other basketball trainers, parents. We might even have some players on to just talk about their experiences in terms of financing the athletic dream.
You know, I know I happen to know that you happen to know more than the average person about women's sports. That, you know, when you go on, for instance, the guide for television, it'll say college basketball, and that means men. And then when it's women, it says women's basketball. There's
Yeah.
a clear distinction. You make less of a distinction between male and female sports. Do you plan to explore any of the dynamics of male versus female or male plus female?
Definitely. There are some trainers that I'll have on the show who I know of as mainly training girls. And these are male trainers. And the fact that as the game of basketball is growing, so is women's basketball right along with it. You and I have both seen girls over the last few years that are just different. And so these girls are getting better and better. And so the resources, some resources need to get better, but there are a lot of resources at the grassroots level that are getting better for the girls and for the women. So we'll definitely be highlighting some of the differences, and also just again some of the resources that are just as strong for the girls as it is for the boys.
So you're familiar with the dfree philosophy, the dfree strategy, dfree content. You've grown up in and around dfree. Why would the dfree podcast network want something about financing athletics and want something related to sports when dfree is more about money?
Well, for one, money is obviously involved in everything. Um, Again, I use the word investment, and I talk about that a lot in the first episode of the podcast, because the first thing you really have to start to think about and decide on is what kind of investment do you want to make. And a lot of dfree is about investing in yourself and investing in your future and figuring out what that looks like financially and socially. So a lot of it goes hand in hand. And so if you're making the decision that you're going forward to invest into, your child's future, and that could look so different, because some kids you just know are gifted and talented and they've got it, but you still need to invest in those kids. Now, the kids who aren't as talented and gifted, you might need to invest a little bit more. So there's a lot to gauge. And when you talk about principles of budgeting and separating your wants from your needs, those things will come into play when you're adding into your budget and your wants and your needs, trainers, equipment, traveling, teams to play on. Those things will work into your yearly budget and your future plans. So it will really cater to those people who are trying to make those decisions, whose kids are playing sports.
Yeah. So whenever you use the term investment, the next term that you have to embrace is return. In business, we call it ROI, return on investment. And so my final question is, if people are convinced that they should make an investment, and if people do the way your podcast will teach them to do, and that is to budget properly for the investment, what kind of return can parents expect to get, or can athletes expect to get? Because not every athlete is LeBron James or Taurasi. Not every athlete is going to be a multi-million-dollar professional. So for the vast majority of athletes, what kind of return can one expect on an investment if you're spending money on trainers and camps and equipment and all the things that you talk about?
Well, I see it as probably two main possible returns. One, you see the return of progress in your kid developing as an athlete in whatever sport they're in. So again, no matter what level they start at, whether they're highly talented, highly skilled, and then you see the return on where they end up, they get even more skilled. Or if they're a little less skilled and talented, you get to see the return of the progress that they're making. So that's athletically. I think the other side, the second possible return, is just seeing them mature as a human being. People talk a lot about the benefits of playing sports. You get to learn principles of teamwork and responsibility and discipline. And I can vouch for that myself. Playing sports helps people in a lot more ways than just becoming a better athlete. So I think those are two ways you could see a return on that investment, because you're also investing in what your kid is going to be exposed to, not just as an athlete, but as a human being.
First of all, I'm very proud of your athleticism, and I'm always grateful to God that I was able to come to almost every one of your games from fourth grade through college, and you didn't lose many. So that's always a blessing, and proud to see what you're doing with young people, and the kind of development that they are achieving as a result of your input for them. So the final description is this, and I don't want to assume this, but it sounds like your podcast is really aimed at parents who have children and whose children they think would benefit from some kind of athletic exposure. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, no question. I would say that's definitely fair. It's mainly for them to get a sense of that information. It could be a godparent or an uncle or a parent figure. It could be a neighbor of someone who's trying to help out the kid they see in the driveway next door, shooting hoops or playing baseball every day, and just looking for that kind of information. But definitely someone who's in that position, a parent or a grandparent, someone who's just looking for the resources and information of what that kind of investment looks like.
Okay, folks, you've heard it from my son's mouth. that the community at large, starting with parents and the extended family, should be investing in young people. But this podcast is going to help us understand what kind of investments make sense, what kind of investments are available, and how to plan for the kind of investments that would benefit young people, both athletically and in terms of their personal maturation. All right, Martin, I'm looking forward to your podcast. And what you'll find is that when people come to the dfree Podcast Network, they may come to Bible economics, but then they'll see your podcast and jump over because they're curious, or someone may see your podcast and then jump over to financial solutions. So the whole idea of having a podcast network is to really synergize and leverage multiple talents and resources for the benefit of all. So thank you. And I look forward to hearing your podcast.
Thank you.
All right, folks, one of my dearest friends and one of my favorite people understand their relationship with money. Dr. Sabrina Ellis is from Cleveland, Ohio. And I was somewhat surprised because she sent me a book that she was writing. And I think she sent it to me so that I could write a little comment, or I don't know. Did I write the forward, Sabrina? I wrote something. You're on mute. And I read the book is called Wife Life. So of course I'm trying to figure out why she sent me a book to teach women how to be better wives. And then I realized that the book really had to do with the opportunities and responsibilities that women have who are married as it relates to understanding their relationship with finances and financial security. So, Dr. Ellis, welcome to the Wife Life introductory podcast. But more importantly, thank you for creating the podcast that flowed out of your book that I think will help millions of people.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited about it.
So, did I write? What did I write?
I was asking you to write the preface. The full title of the book is Wife Life, Securing Your Future. And as I recall, you thought like you said, you thought I was just writing to teach wives how to be better wives. And
yeah, I was confused.
Realized it had the financial piece to it.
Yeah, I was going to call your husband, Bishop Ellis, and ask him why his wife was asking me to help her teach women about being wives. But thank God I didn't do it, because he would have laughed. He would have laughed so hard he wouldn't have been able to talk to me on the phone.
Right.
And called me names too. But when I read the book, the more I read the book, the more moved I was by the book, because first of all, so many women that I knew who, because they didn't have the information that you shared, had circumstances that could have been avoided. So what motivated you around this wife life theme?
Well, I have to say, initially it was born out of the context that I've been in growing up in church, and watching so many women lose their husbands who've served in the church for years and years and years. And I couldn't understand why they always seem to be without after their husbands passed, or in need, and some even to the point of poverty. And then, it kind of expanded as I got older, continuing to see that same behavior. And then even in other women, why is it that after it's bad enough that you have to become a widow, but after the husband passes, that these women are so close to poverty, or actually now living in poverty. And so that was my initial concern. And of course, my relationship with my parents. It wasn't a demise, but a divorce, and which changed my mom and me and my siblings' lives drastically. And she was not prepared for what came soon after the divorce. And so over time, it just really became an issue for me. And I decided to just make it an issue for everybody else by writing the book and talking about the need to learn how to prepare for your future when the inevitable is going to happen.
Yeah. Well, in the book, you really start with motivating and challenging women just to know the facts about their reality. Forget the divorce and becoming a widow, but I think your concern is that a lot of women just don't know what's happening in the household, beyond shopping for groceries and other things, but in terms of the family business. Talk about that.
Absolutely. We need to know. That is also a concern. And I don't profess to be a professional. I'm not a financial counselor or anything of that nature. I had to learn. I learned. And the more that I learned, and the truth of the matter is, dfree is a part of my learning process.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I realized that women just don't seem to be as involved in the business of the household as we should be. Many times we rely on our spouses to just take care of everything, just do everything. And that, while we're all alive, that may be fine. But the time may come when that spouse is not there. And if you have no awareness about finances, you're in trouble. You're really in trouble. It just happened to be in my case that I handled the finances in our home. My husband he wanted to bring the money home, right. And he was glad to do that and glad to see the smile on my face when I saw how big the check was, whatever the check was. But he allowed me to handle it as long as he had do whatever he wanted to do with money. But that just kind of pushed me to learn more, to learn about investments, to learn about saving for a rainy day, to make sure we were covered with insurance and all of those things that sometimes we overlook and assume that we can't afford to do.
Yeah. So what kind of guests will you have on your podcast, or what kind of subjects will you be focusing on?
Well, we do have a couple of ladies that have experienced the loss of their husbands. They will kind of be in the beginning to talk about their experience. Then we work our way through a financial advisor financial advisor. Then we go all the way up to a probate attorney who provides quite a bit of information and basically sharing with us the things that we should do so that at the point of a loss that we don't have to grieve twice. Grieving the loss of a loved one is enough, but trying to figure out how you're going to pay for a funeral, how you're going to live beyond the funeral, and those things. So we have a probate attorney that is going to help us to know how to stay out of probate court.
Wow. You've heard me talk about my grandmother. My father's mother was not a widow before she was experiencing a husband who was incapacitated. The data says that we're more likely to be disabled before we turn 65 than die before we're 65. And I think women who do know, like you've known about family finances and managing family finances are also better equipped when their spouse becomes disabled, because that happens a lot. And disability can be mental, it can be physical, it can be both. I'm very interested in hearing your podcast. We'll be promoting the podcast. As I told everybody, we had you on our podcast to interview as a guest when the book came out.
Right.
And what grew out of talking to people like yourself was the vision for having a podcast network where we would combine our talents, our resources, our guests, our information, and we would promote each other collectively. And so we started with the best guests we've had over the last 3 years, and you certainly were one of them. And my prayer is that this podcast network will become kind of one-stop shop for Black people, especially looking for solutions to their respective financial situations. So thank you for having enough faith in us to join our team. And we'll be praying together that God will distribute this information broadly to empower our people.
Thank you. Thank you for including me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the dfree in the Black podcast, the pulse of mental, spiritual, and financial health. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe on whichever streaming platforms you get your podcast.